Just about the, in the demo class we discussed about the MicroStrategy architecture, like how the architecture looks like. MicroStrategy goes to the metadata, read all the definitions, formulates the SQL, opens a connection to the warehouse and get the data and everything. So the next thing that we're going to start discussing is how to configure such environment. Okay, so the first step in MicroStrategy that we're going to do is, I'm just going to open a notepad over here. And just a suggestion, just a request, if in case you don't have anything, any question, please be on mute so that we get a good quality recording, nothing else. All right, thank you. So now the first thing that we're going to discuss is how to configure the metadata. As we already know that the metadata is a repository which collects all the definitions and definitions of the objects in MicroStrategy, all the configuration details and everything. So we need to understand how we can configure the metadata in MicroStrategy. That's the first thing that we're gonna see today. In order to create a metadata, oh okay, let me just, I'm so sorry. Yes, I have just shared my screen, so let me know once you can see the screen. I'm sorry for that. You can see the screen now? All right, perfect. Okay, so now the first thing that we're gonna do is to configure the metadata. As we know, the metadata is a repository which collects all the object definitions and the connectivity information, configuration and connectivity. In order to create a metadata, what are the things that we're gonna do? We will first start with a simple blank database. Okay, I will create one, I will have one schema or one database, and under that I'm going to configure my metadata. This is only one time, right? Once your metadata is configured, you're not going to touch henceforth. You can use any kind of a database. You can use Oracle, Teradata, NetEase, anything. For our training purpose throughout, we're going to use Microsoft Access. I'm going to use my Microsoft Access as the database to create my metadata. So what I will do is I'll go to one location and I will create one new access file. That's going to be the completely blank file. Okay, so I'm going to create a new access file over here. I'm going to say create new. Let me just open an access file over here itself. I'm going to use Microsoft Office Access and I'm going to say a blank database. I will pick up the location where I want to save it. I'll go to the corresponding drive. Okay, and over here let me just give some name. I'm gonna give just as this is ATM batch, so I'm going to say 8 and I'm going to say this is metadata, and the type that I'm going to select is normal 2000 to 2003 format. So basically I'm trying to create a blank access file. This is for metadata. I will say OK and I'm going to say create. So if you look over here, my new access file has been created. No table exists, nothing. It's completely blank access database. And once that's been done, I'm just going to close it and I can see a new access data file has been created successfully. Okay, so it's a blank database that we have created. If in case you are using Oracle or something, you're going to create a blank schema database. Once this has been done, you want some connectivity from MicroStrategy. You want your MicroStrategy to connect to this particular access database. And for that, what you have to do is you have to create a ODBC. So first you're going to create a database that is blank. Okay, sorry, that is blank. And one after that, you will create a ODBC connection. ODBC, it's an open database source connection. You create a connection, it's a Windows admin component. You create a ODBC where you define all your database details. And in order to create a ODBC, you will go to control panel. Under control panel, you will go to the administrative tools, and under administrative tools, you will find ODBC data sources. So I'm going to create a new ODBC data sources over here. Under that, I'm going to define under system DSA. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to create a new ODBC which will be pointing to the blank database. Okay, so I'm going to click on add over here. I'm going to select the corresponding driver. What type of database you are using, based on that you have to select the corresponding driver. So if in case in our example we are using Microsoft Access, so I'm going to use Microsoft Access driver. If in, let's say you are using SQL Server, so you will use the SQL Server driver. So that depends upon the type of database. You have to select the corresponding driver first, and then you give the database details. So we are using Microsoft Access, so I'm going to select Microsoft Access driver. I'm going to say finish. I'll give some name over here. The same name I will give over here as well. This is the ODBC name that I'm giving, and I have to select the corresponding database from here. So I've given the I've mentioned the this thing ODBC name, and from here I'm going to select the new database file that we have just created. So I'll come over here. Under that I'm going to select this, and this is the one that we had created, right? This was the blank database that we had created, and we're going to select the same file. Okay, so I'm going to select this particular file. I'm going to say okay, and you can see that the database has been selected over here. Perfect. I'm going to click on OK.
One question.
Sure, please.
Yeah. So the database folder, is it already there in after you install MSTR on your system, or did you create that folder and then you are creating the repository there?
Which folder, sir?
The database folder
No, no,
where you
no. That is
created
that
that
is
access
that
point.
is I have created in my E drive. It's nothing with respect to
Oh,
MicroStrategy. You will have
okay.
Oracle install on some server, right? You will have
Mm-hmm.
Teradata install on some machine. I'm just using Access file, so I have to save under some location. This is the database that I have created one folder, and I'm keeping all these files over here. If you have Oracle, you have to give us server details then. See now, if let's say if I'm using a SQL server, I will select the SQL server over here. I will say finish, and over here now I have to give the server name. It is just because it is an Access database, it is a file which will be saved under some location. So I have to pick it from that location, nothing else.
Got it.
Okay, all right. So once this ODBC has been created, I can see 8 underscore metadata ODBC created successfully. And now if I come back to the notepad, but blank database has been created, ODBC has been created, and the next step is to configure the metadata. And this can be done via using configuration wizard. A configuration wizard.
One,
Sorry.
one more question.
Yes, please.
You use 32-bit ODBC, right? Is
Yes,
there
yes,
a
yes.
something like
Yes,
because MSTR is 32-bit or
yeah,
just Windows is
MicroStrategy
32?
MicroStrategy is prefers the OD only with respect to ODBC. It picks up 32-bit. Okay, all right. Now the next thing is that we're going to configure the metadata, and this will be done using configuration wizard. A configuration wizard is a MicroStrategy tool component. So you have to access the configuration wizard, and through there you can configure your metadata. So when you install the MicroStrategy, even the configuration wizard gets installed along with it. So we will see how to access the configuration wizard, and we will see how to configure the metadata. So I'm going to close all this window for now. I'm going to open the configuration wizard. So if you look over here, this is the configuration wizard. I'm going to click over here. It's going to open the wizard for me, and through that particular wizard we can create the metadata. So if you look at the first entry, it says create metadata, history list, and statistics repository tables and everything. You are just interested to create the metadata. Statistics tables and the history tables are the advanced thing. I do not want to record any kind of a statistics or something like that over here, but metadata is mandatory. So you have to make sure that you create the okay, so you have to make sure that you select that particular uh, metadata option. Statistics and something are, it's okay if you don't select that, is okay, and we really don't want to even configure at this point of time. So I will click on this create metadata, this particular entry. I will click on next. I don't want to configure his list statistics, no, nothing like that. I just am interested to create a metadata. I'm going to click on next, and the next thing that is going to ask us to select the corresponding ODBC. And that's the reason we created an ODBC. Why? Because MicroStrategy can interact with ODBC, and ODBC are the one which will interact with the database. So from the available DSN, you have to make sure that you pick up the correct ODBC, right? So you have to make sure that you select the correct ODBC under which you want to configure your metadata. So we have created a new ODBC with the name 8 underscore metadata. I'm going to click over here and I will click on next. As soon as I click on next, it says it comes to a last step which says finish. If I click on finish, it will start configuring the metadata. It will start creating the required tables in metadata, which will help them to record the information. Now the question over here is that, okay, something will happen at the back end which will make sure that the tables will be created. But what if I'm using a different type of database? Some project would be using metadata which is built on based on, let's say, Oracle. Some is using Microsoft Excel. The third project or third person is using Teradata. Every database would have some or the other syntax changes, right? So how MicroStrategy is going to understand that? If you look over here closely, there is one script which is getting executed. This is the script, and this script is compatible with my Access database. So if you look over here, what is the file name? It is MD, which stands for metadata, and ACC, which stands for Access database. So when you install the MicroStrategy, these are the predefined scripts also comes up along with it. So there are predefined metadata creation scripts which will be compatible with your underlying database. So what I'm going to show you now is I'll go to this location and I will show you few metadata scripts which are already there, and depending upon the type of database that you're using, it will pick it up accordingly. So if I go to this location that is under my installation folder, okay, and I'll show you my metadata scripts which we have over here. Okay, so if you look over here, the one which starts with MD, that is for metadata. The ones which I have highlighted over here, those are all metadata creation scripts because it starts with MD. So it's confirmed that these are all metadata creation scripts. The one is for the Access database. See, MD stands for metadata and followed by the database names. So if I open this, you can clearly see all the create statements, update statements, and everything. At no point of time you're going to touch this scripts. This is just for information to make you understand how the metadata tables are getting created. But you're not going to modify anything over here. It's all going to be done by MicroStrategy. So don't have to touch this. This is just for your understanding purpose. If in case, let's say you're using Oracle, so it will automatically pick this particular file, metadata orcl, that stands for Oracle. So automatically this script will be executed if you're using the Oracle database for the metadata. So basically whatever the database you use, based on that it's going to pick up the corresponding SQL file, and accordingly my metadata will be created. So if we come back to the configuration wizard, it is picking up MDACC, which means that we are using Access database to configure our metadata. So correct script has been picked up. If I click on finish, that script will start getting executed. And once the execution is successful, all the required tables would be created in the metadata, and the configuration of metadata will be completed. Sorry. So we'll just wait for a minute around. It will take lesser than that. And once the script has been executed successfully, we'll go back to the Access database. We will check whether the required tables have been created or not, just to confirm. So I'll go to that particular location. This was the Access, right? So now if I open this Access database, I can see all the tables are available. Just a minute over here. Just a minute. Okay. So now if I look over here, This is the Access database which has all the tables which are created. So you can see all these tables. These are all metadata tables, and this have been configured successfully. Initially when we created it was a blank database, but as soon as we ran it via configuration wizard, all the required tables were created, and this confirms that my metadata is configured successfully. So the metadata
One
configuration,
question.
yes, please go ahead.
So, what tables are these? From where did it create these tables?
That's what I said, right? This is the script. I already showed you the script, right? So one second, I will show
So
you.
these are like default MicroStrategy tables.
These are all microstrategy tables which are required to record the. This will be useful if I create tomorrow, if I create any new object, those definitions would be stored over here.
It's more like audit tables.
I would not say an audit tables. Audit tables would be the statistics tables. Those are different tables which are available. These are all repository tables which helps you to record all the object definitions and the configuration details. Audit tables are
Oh,
something different which records all your statistics, and we have not configured the statistics via configuration wizard, right? As I told you that I'm not going to
yeah.
configure the statistics or history tables. If I would have selected the statistics as well, more tables would have been added over here which will record the statistics. Make sense? So if tomorrow if I create any new user, that user information will be stored over here. If I create new project in MicroStrategy, that information will be stored. If I create new attributes, new reports, new filters, all those information would be stored over here. And this tables will be where my object definition are getting stored, and based on that my MicroStrategy metadata will generate the SQL through which it can fetch the data. Make sense? I'm
Perfect.
I'm just going to take a pause over here. Any questions so far? Jashwant, anything from your end? Any question? No? All right, perfect. Please feel free to interrupt me if in guys have any question, any query. It's simple. It makes sense, does not make sense. Please feel free to ask me any type of a query. All right. So now we have configured the metadata successfully, and I'm going to close this. So my metadata has been created successfully. That is the first step what you have to do when you start working on a project from scratch. If you're working on existing project, all this would have been configured by the administrator. But this is just something that we started from the scratch, so we need to understand how all this thing happens. The next thing that we're gonna discuss is the second thing that we're gonna discuss is how to configure the intelligent server. MicroStrategy server is called as intelligent server, and next thing that we're going to see is how to configure the intelligent server. What do you mean by intelligent server? Intelligent server is nothing that you're just configuring a server on a machine which needs to point to metadata, right? Because whenever you perform any request, it will go via server only, right? If in case you are working on a server environment, so it will go to a server, and server should route you to the metadata to understand what the definition of those objects are to create the correct sequence. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to configure the server, and when you say the configuration of a server, it needs to point to metadata. So it's under again the same window. It's again under the MicroStrategy configuration wizard, which will help you to configure iServer, or you can say intelligent server. So I'm going to click on next. I want my iServer to point to the metadata. So you have to make sure that you select the same ODBC on which your metadata was configured. So we have 8 underscore metadata. This is the ODBC name that we have given under which my access data, which my metadata has been created. I'm going to click on next. It will ask me for the credentials, and by default the credential is administrator as an ID with a blank password. So it says that if this is the first time you're connecting to the MicroStrategy intelligence server, use the username as administrator without a password. So I'm using the username as administrator with a blank password. I'm going to say next. Once the authentication is successful, you can give the server name. Server name could be anything. It could be your name, machine name, company name, whatever the server name you want to associate with it. So we'll just wait for this authentication to be successful, and once the authentication is successful, I can give any server name over here. By default, I'm giving this server name. You can give your name, whatever the name you want to give it up. Once it's been done, I'm going to click on next. I'm going to say next. I'm going to say next, and I'm going to say finish. Once I click on finish, my iServer will be configured. My intelligent server will be configured successfully, which means that my server will start pointing to the metadata. So we will just wait over here, and once this step has been done, it will say that the iServer configuration has been done successfully. It will just take a minute or something, so we'll wait over here. Okay, and if you look over here, it says that my iServer has been configured successfully. I will close this, and the configuration of intelligent server is successful. So now we saw that even how to configure the intelligent server. The third thing that we're going to see today is how to configure the project sources. If you remember, I have shown you, like when you log in into the Microstrategy developer, let me do one thing. I'm going to remove all this thing to avoid the confusion. Okay, so as I said, when you log in into the Microstrategy, the first thing that you see are the project sources. The project sources are the one which are directly or indirectly pointing to the metadata. So now what we need to understand is how to configure the project source. A project sources can be configured in two modes. It is called as two-tier, or you can say as direct mode. It can also be configured as three-tier, or you can say server mode. What is the difference over here? When we say my project source has been configured in a two-tier mode, it means that everything is local to my machine. I have metadata on my machine, I have MicroStrategy on my machine, so I'm directly creating a project source which is pointing to the metadata. So this will directly point to metadata. But if I say three-tier or a server mode, I have one machine on which I have configured the server, and I will create my project which will be pointing to the server. So this will point to server, and server is the one which is pointing to metadata. So either that's the reason I said the project source can directly point to metadata or indirectly point to metadata, but it has to go to metadata. So when I say a two-tier mode or a direct mode, it will be directly pointing to the metadata. No server has been involved in between. So everything is local to your machine. So whatever activity you do, no other person can access it. So now let's say I'm creating a metadata over here. I'm configuring it under a project source, and if you guys try to access it, you will not be able to do it. But if let's say we are working on the same organization and I configure my machine as server, you can definitely access that server. So because we are on the same domain, you can definitely create one project source and you can point it to my server, and you can start using the environment. So that's the reason the next thing that we're going to see is how to configure the project source in both the modes. In both the modes, when I say it's going to be pointing to the server, my server has been already configured, which will be pointing to the metadata. That is in the second step. We have already configured the iServer, which is already pointing to metadata. So let's try to understand how to create the project sources in both the modes. I'm going to right click over here and I will say create new project source. I'm going to say create new project source. I'm going to give some name. Let's say first I'm going to start with I will give the name as two-tier. Okay, and if you look over here under the connection mode, I have two options, direct or a server. If I go with the direct, it will ask me to select metadata directly. If I go with the server, it will ask me the server to select it. So if I select it direct over here, you can clearly see it is directly asking me the ODBC, that is the metadata ODBC that you want to get it get it mapped to. So I will select 8 underscore metadata. This is the metadata, right? Metadata ODBC. And I will click on OK. And once this has been done, my project source will be created successfully. Again, let's say I will create new project source. This time I will give the name as 3-tier. I'm going to say my connection mode is server. And if I try to search for the active servers, you will see, okay, this is the server. This is exactly the same server name that we have given while configuring the iServer, right? So I'm going to select this server. And once that's been done, I'm going to click on OK. And even my 3-tier project source will be created successfully. Just by looking at the icon, you can clearly see whether it's a 2-tier or a 3-tier. If you look over here, it's a same icon, but just in the 3-tier or in a server mode, you can see a globe icon here at the in the background, which means that if you see a globe icon, it means that it's been it's under the server mode. If you don't see a globe icon, it means that it's a direct mode. Okay, but in both the cases, my project source are pointing to metadata. If I try to access any one of the project, I have to give the login as administrator with the blank password, as you already know, and it will say that no project exists. Why? Because as of now, no projects has been created under a project source. In both the cases, even if I try to access this, it will say no projects thus exist. It's a completely blank project source. As of now, no projects have been created. But yes, the only thing is that we have configured the project source successfully. Next thing that we need to do is we need to create a project. But before we do that, any question over here? No? Perfect. All right. So now let's say the next thing that I have to do is we have to create a project. I'm going to disconnect. I'll try to use this server mode. A project, as we know that a project in MicroStrategy is pointing to warehouse. A project is something where you're gonna under which you're gonna create all your objects, and that will help you to fetch the data from the warehouse to get the required data. So the next thing that you have to do is you have to create a project. Very simple thing. Just right click over here. Just right click over here and you can say create new project. Very simple. I'm going to say create new project. I will say create project. I can give any name, first project, and I will simply say okay, and I will simply say okay. So now if you look over here, it started creating the project. And if you remember, in the demo class I have told you every project will look like same. It will have all the default folders and the subfolders. This is the step where MicroStrategy creates all the folders and the subfolders. And just to make sure that every project has the same look and feel. So this is the way that MicroStrategy is going to maintain the consistency. So we'll wait over here, and once this has been done, you can see a new project will be created successfully. So I'm just going to add in a notepad over here. The fourth thing that we are discussing, but that what we are seeing is to create the projects. Okay, so we'll just wait over here, and we'll see once this has been done. Okay, so this has been done, items. Yeah, you can see the project has been created. I will say okay, that's it, and you can see a new project has been created, and all these folders and subfolders have been created successfully. Okay, as of now, still this project is not pointing to warehouse. We have just created one new project, which is again a blank, and there is no mapping that has been done so far. Okay, now the next thing and the last thing that I'm going to show you is how we can get this project pointing to actual warehouse. Okay, so the last thing for today that we're going to see is how to connect a project to the actual data warehouse. Before what are the prerequisite for it? We need to have one thing, which is data warehouse, right? So I'm going to show you one sample database that I'm going to use it for my warehouse. Again, It's based on Microsoft Access. So if you look over here, I have one sample data access file, and if I show you, this will have all the data, basically a data warehouse. So I have this table which shows all this information. I have this table which shows all this information. I have some other table which shows me all the employee information and so on. This is my data warehouse, and I'm using the Microsoft Access. As I've already told you, I'm going to use Microsoft Access throughout my training. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, we already have a data warehouse and I want my project to point to that particular warehouse. So again, the first thing that I have to do is I have to create a ODBC. Why? Because MicroStrategy can only interact with the ODBC. So for that ODBC, I need to make sure it is pointing to data warehouse. So I'll again go back to the control panel. I will go to the ODBC. I will select that and I will create a new system TSN. Now this ODBC will be pointing to my actual warehouse. Again, that depends upon the type of database that you are using. You select the corresponding driver and give the required details. We are using Microsoft Access, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to say this is data warehouse ODBC. I'm going to select my required database. Sample data, right? Okay, I'm going to say okay. My new file has been selected. I'm going to say okay, and my data warehouse ODBC has been created successfully. Once this is done, I just have to close this. ODBC has been created, which is pointing to data warehouse. For a project cannot directly connect to a ODBC. There is one more object that you have to create in MicroStrategy, which is called as database instance. A database instance is an object in MicroStrategy which will point to the required ODBC along with the required credentials. So when you run a report from a project, of course it will go to the warehouse to fetch the data, and it might require some credentials, right? If in case you are using Oracle, you will open a connection to the Oracle, but you require some credentials as well, right? How MicroStrategy is going to use those credentials? For that, you have to create a database instance. A database instance consists of two things. One, the selection of ODBC. Second, you provide the required credentials which are needed to access that particular database. So we'll come back to MicroStrategy and we will create a new database instance. In order to create a database instance, you have to go to the administration. Under the administration, there is a configuration manager, and you see an entry called as database instances. So under this particular database instances, you're going to define a new one. So I'm going to say create new database instance. I'm going to give first I'm going to give some name. This is my, let's say, first project database instance name. Okay, you have to select the type of database. We are using Microsoft Access, so I'm going to select Microsoft Access, and over here you can see the database connection. And as we know, as I already told you, the database connection is contains of two things: ODBC connection plus required credentials. So I'm going to say over here new. This is the name that I'm going to give. Let's say I'll just give some DB connection name. Okay, and you can see that it asks me to select the required ODBC. Which ODBC I have to select? That has to be as of data warehouse. So I'm going to select this one, and over here I have to give the required credential. Just to add over here, my Access database does not require credentials, so I will give anything dummy over here. But if you're using another relational database like Oracle, Teradata or something which requires the credentials, you have to define over here. Microsoft Access does not require this, but still I will create a new login name over here. So I'm just going to say login. Sorry. Okay, I will give some dummy name. Let's say admin. That's it. This is just for a dummy perspective because I don't need any credentials for accessing Access database. But if you're using Oracle or something, you have to give the correct ID and password over here, which MicroStrategy will use it to access the data warehouse. I will say okay. My database login will be created over here, and once that's been created, I will click on OK. and I will say okay. So my new database instance has been created successfully. A database instance is pointing to my actual ODBC. Along with that, I have given the required credentials. So once this database instance has been created successfully, what you have to do is you have to make sure now your project, the new project that you have created, is pointing to database instance. And how you can do it? It's very simple. Just right click over here, go to the project configuration. Under that, you have an option to select the database instances. From the drop down, you select the one which is needed. This is the name of the database instance we have given, right? It's a first project. I'm going to make this first project as a default, and that's it. Thereafter, my project will be pointing to the database instance. Database instance is pointing to ODBC. ODBC is pointing to my actual warehouse. So once I click on OK, my job is done. My project is successfully connected to the warehouse. And once that's been done, I'll just disconnect and log in back, and thereafter I can use my first project to create all the required objects so that it can fetch the data from the warehouse. So there are 5 things that we have seen today. First, we saw how to configure the metadata. Second, how to configure the server. Third, how to configure the project sources. Fourth, how to create a project. And last, how you can map your project to the warehouse. Any question over here with respect to any of the things that we have discussed?
I have one question.
Sure, please.
Uh, this is say this one, even if I have to create a new project in the server, I can go with like the 3-tier format, right? Whatever you did here.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Okay, but say if the project is already there and I am a new developer into the team, and I have to connect. I mean, I have to download that desktop version on my
Yes.
laptop or something.
Okay, so now let's say you're working on a real environment where my project is already been started and you're just a new team member who has joined. You have to install MicroStrategy client on your machine. Okay, so once you download the MicroStrategy client, you will see this window, right? You can access the MicroStrategy developer. What you have to do is you just have to create a new project source and you give the exact server name on which your environment is built. Once you give that server name, it will look something like this. You can access that server, you give your credentials, and the project that is already existing in your environment will be listed over here. And you can start working on your project. Whatever you saved can be seen across by other developers as well.
Okay, so I have to give the same name, like 3-tier there. Only then will
No,
it
no, no, not
populate?
not the name of project source. Project source you can
Okay.
give any name, whatever you want to give, but the server name has to be same. If let's
Okay.
say I and you both are working on a same project, okay, and my server name is ABC, you create a project source with the name, let's say 1, but it has to point to server ABC. On my machine I will give project source name as B, but it has to point to the same server name 1.
So how about like two people working on the same project at the same time?
That's
How
okay,
will it affect it?
that's okay, but it will restrict you from the schema object perspective. Both the developers can create public objects. There is no restriction as such. But at one point of time, only one person can work on schema object, because schema objects are the
Oh,
something where your metadata is getting recorded. Okay, my schema objects are something which points to directly to a table and columns, and that's the reason only one architect can work at one instance of time. When it's creating a schema object, it will lock everything and no other developer can create the schema objects. But if you're creating a public objects, parallelly I also can create a public objects. There is no restriction as such on that.
okay.
Does that clear your doubt?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, anything else? No.
No,
All right, perfect.
no.
So we'll just stop over here for today. We'll meet up tomorrow at same time and we'll continue from there.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Bye bye.